Today, I sat down with Alex Chau of Coldwell Banker, and we discussed her and her business here in Sarasota, Florida. Alex, thank you for joining us today. So just to kind of get started, tell us a little bit about you, how you got started in real estate, especially here in Sarasota.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I got started in real estate actually right after I got my master's in planning and civic urbanism. I decided I absolutely did not want to work for a city government and decided to take it in the real estate finance route. So I was doing real estate consulting for several years in Orlando with big engineering type firms up there. And then I decided to move home to Sarasota, where I was born and raised, and be closer to my family as I started my own family. And the type of job that I was doing just doesn't really exist in Sarasota. So they had paid for me to get my real estate license. So I just kind of fell back on that and started a career almost on a smaller scale, right? So instead of working with developers on a larger scale, finding someone a home is a lot like a site selection for a developer. You listen to their needs and then, meet them. So the skills transferred. So it's been good.
And so, how long have you been doing it, and what do you find most rewarding about the profession?
Yeah, I've been licensed for 12 years actually. And I've been with Coldwell Banker for over 3 years now. So that's really been the heart of my buying and selling part. And the most rewarding part is certainly the people, and just knowing that you're helping them with probably one of the biggest transactions of their life, if not the biggest.
Yeah, no, that's what we always hear is, why, when most people say it's because you're helping someone, this is one of their biggest investments that someone can make is buying or selling a home.
Yep.
And so understanding the complexities that come with that and how to work that is always great. That's why we always recommend, reaching us. I don't know how many people try to think they could do it on their own in this day and age.
Yeah,
right?
experience matters for sure. Can you do it by yourself? Absolutely. Like, I understand that I'm in a service-based business. I think you would consider probably yourself as well. So it's not that you can't do it by yourself, but we are mere mortals. We have limited time here on earth. We cannot be experts at everything. And the number of times that you and I have probably seen it go wrong all plays into the way that we help people do it right.
Especially, there's other aspects that come into it, right? Most people don't know there's negotiations involved, right?
Yeah.
How to handle that, because that can be very tricky, especially if you're doing it yourself and you have to then negotiate with a realtor who's constantly doing it. The last thing you want to do is, feel you're at a disadvantage from that end, as someone who might not sell or wants to sell by themselves or try to handle it themselves without that aspect behind them, to help them out with that. So
yeah, absolutely. We always say getting the house under contract is actually the easy part,
right?
Which it's not so easy in today's market, but that seems to be the easy part. And then the real work begins once that contract is signed, and you're meeting those critical dates, and you're working with lenders sometimes, or other vendors such as 1031, whatever people are trying to accomplish to get to that end goal through inspections and through all sorts of things that can go wrong. We're just there to guide people through and make sure we make it to the closing table.
All good stuff, great stuff there. And so, what's one of the most rewarding things you find helping them out there? So is it really just the end of the sale? Is it understanding what they are trying to do as a family? What are they trying to do? What's their long-term goals, investment-wise, or is it what do you find as the most rewarding aspect of that?
I think they're all pretty rewarding. I'm lucky enough to work with so many people that are in my personal network, being born and raised here. So it really is helping people that already have trust in me, which is great. I'm working to expand outside of that a little bit, but when you can help a friend or a family member, either all types of things, right? With their primary home, with an investment property. I just helped some people get into a vacation home that, makes some rental income. So all kinds of things that, just suit their family, whatever that may be, that all of it's rewarding.
So with the, obviously we've seen over the past, I'd say probably year and a half here, a shift in the market, right? And the trends,
Yes.
What kind of things are you seeing now out there, that in that regard, whether locally here or even knowing on a larger scale across the nation there?
Yeah, well, specifically speaking about Florida and Texas markets, because those are kind of the same right now, separate from maybe what the Northeast is doing. But Florida and Texas both have more inventory now than we've had in the last 8 years. So we see opportunities for buyers to negotiate like we have not seen since I've been doing this full time. So it's a real opportunity to ask for things and probably get them. You know, we're negotiating off the price. We're not necessarily competing with other offers, which gives you that leverage, right?
Right.
A lot of sellers are, putting forward closing costs and things like that. So it's a really great time for buyers and one that we haven't seen in years.
So it's a lot more days on inventory that are causing the sellers to either reduce price or wanting to be able to sell as soon as possible. So giving that buyer that advantage.
Yeah, so more inventory typically means longer days on market. That's exactly what we're seeing. And the longer you sit there and the less, competition there is for that property, the more leverage the buyer's gonna have.
Okay, yeah. So, so on that, what's a typical transaction for you, that you see every day? I know not every deal is the same, right?
Yeah, that's the beauty of it.
Just kind of talk through, give us a little bit of that typical transaction and how it works, from your end there.
Yeah, there's certainly no 2 days in real estate that are the same. That's part of why I absolutely love this job, because every single day is like a little puzzle that you need to figure out. But I mean, let's just say typically I have a seller, they want to sell their single family home. We meet a month or 2 or 3 before coming on the market, sometimes even a year if they feel like they need to do some renovations. We talk about what those renovations would be that would bring them the most value when they put their home on the market. And then, a couple of months before, we're coming up with a marketing plan. We're taking those professional photos. We're building the website. We're building YouTube ads. We're building social media ads. Just really that robust marketing plan. Flyers. I just had a buyer, say, I got your flyer in the mail. I'd like to buy that house. It works.
Right.
Sometimes even the old school stuff still works. So yeah, just building that marketing plan and getting it ready. And then since I'm a smaller producer realtor, one of the services that I offer is always meeting anyone that's interested in buying the property there. So I'm there for every showing. I'm opening the blinds. I'm showing them in. I'm making sure they see all the amenities and know what the neighborhood is like, and just really providing that full service to my clients.
Okay. No, that's great. So, obviously from our end, with me being a qualified intermediary, I deal with 1031 exchanges.
Yeah.
Along those lines there. So have you ever had any clients who've ever mentioned about doing a 1031 exchange, or any stories that you want to share, on those clients, those investors?
Sure. I did have one investor client, and I'm going to do the spoiler alert. It did not actually go through. So we did not make it through the end. We probably should have called you.
Right.
I think that they came to me with an idea of that they wanted to sell a property that they had, I believe it was in Colorado, and buy something in Lakewood Ranch, Florida. And we ended up just not finding the right house within the timeline.
Right.
So it didn't make it happen. That was at the height of the market when it was not advantageous for buyers. And it was a seller's market, and we just were competing with a lot of other people out there.
And you mentioned the timeline. That's one of the big things with the 1031 is that timeline. I know when we're working with you or other realtors and they have clients doing 1031 exchanges, we're always trying to tell them what that timeline is, because this way then you can effectively use your resources to try to find what they're looking for and help them out along those lines there, especially, that 45-day identification period is huge. That's the big first timeline that comes in, from that end. So, how do you see any value in that? That's what one of the things we try to work with is like, hey, you're working with here, they have 45 days, here's what the date is here, so you can then use that to your advantage, whether it's negotiating or anything like that. So
yeah, there is so much value in that, and I can't wait to successfully do a deal with you, because I'm sure it would be very smooth. But there are so many critical dates in a contract, and then add in a 1031 and those critical dates on top of that. I mean, I pride myself in knowing a lot. I don't know everything. So who I partner with is everything to me, right? Because all those little parts and pieces, the mortgage guy, the 1031 guy, the closing people, we're all gonna work together to make that a seamless transaction
Right.
for our client, we become a true partnership and a team to get that to the finish line. And so having good people in the business that I can refer to and that's going to say, hey, you know, this is the timeline, and, you know, spelling it all out, and so everyone's clear and on the same page before we even start is invaluable.
Yeah, that's one of the things we kind of try to pride ourselves in. You know, yes, we're a qualified intermediary, but from a realtor standpoint, we're another tool in their tool belt, right?
Absolutely.
You know, just like you mentioned, you know, you have lenders that you're going to refer to that you constantly work with that you know can help get them, you know, the financing that they need. They're great at what they do. Home inspectors, you know, inspection companies and so forth, roofers, plumbers. You know, you have all this in your book of go-to. You know,
do we say Rolodex anymore?
Yeah.
Do people still know what that
in
is?
in your phone, right?
In your phone.
So, you know, and for us, it's just that other component that some people might just not need at that current point in time.
Yeah.
But eventually might come through in the end, say, I know a guy, you know, and this is who you need to reach out to, because they can definitely help explain it, right? We don't expect realtors to be the know-all with the aspects of a 1031. It's just, hey, I know someone, you need to talk to him. He can explain everything too, because there's a lot more nuances that come in the play with that. So.
Yeah, and I can just imagine having a client where, you know, maybe they hadn't even thought of it.
Right.
But we're having a conversation of, okay, you want to sell, I understand, let's talk about why, or let's talk about why you're buying. You know, I always want to know what's motivating people. It informs, you know, price, timeline, so many things about the transaction. So if someone's why then, you know, reveals that they could be a good candidate for a 1031 and it wasn't even on their radar, think how valuable that would be to them if I mentioned that they
just the
could
fact
be a
that
candidate.
you see the bigger picture to
Absolutely.
help them overall, and that's what we try to, you know, that's one of the things we pride in trying to say is, you know, there's more than just this transaction here. What's their bigger picture? You know, 1031s are used as wealth building tools. You know, estate planning, it can be an estate planning tool. You know, and it's not only just limited to residential, because it could be for commercial people, you know, and who knows what they're doing in their business, right? They need to downsize, they may need to grow, right? And that's how the 1031 comes into play to help them to maximize those dollars there and build that portfolio that every real estate investor, I think, wants, right? They want to build their job is to build a real estate portfolio, you know, that they look at, not just, oh, I'm just going to have one property here, you know, which could be good, but you know, a lot want to build that out there from that end. So so you know, from that perspective, how do you think 1031s help investors out? How do you see that playing out with investors, knowing that 1031 exchanges are available?
Yeah, I mean, I think investor can look like so many different things, and I just want to point that out too, because we hear real estate investors and we think of, like, I don't know, maybe some guy in a stuffy office, maybe some guy that doesn't wear shoes and works from home. I don't know.
Right.
But an investor could be someone with just one property, like you said, looking to grow, you know? So an investor doesn't have to be this big, scary term. Investor could just be someone that's in the market. You know, they're renting that property out. They're not sure, you know, that's the one that they want to carry. Maybe they want two. With two different streams of income, you know, or perhaps they want to diversify in two different areas. I think after the storms, a lot of people are thinking diversification may be a good thing. Maybe I don't want all my rentals on Siesta Key, or, you know, something like that. So we're seeing people change strategy. So I think anytime we can bring tools and opportunities and additional value to transactions, that's what people remember.
Right.
Right?
No,
it's not just a transaction anymore. Then you're like changing their life.
Right.
I mean, not to be dramatic, but it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, no, it's, you know, that's a great point when you bring up about, you know, rediversifying, you know, their assets there too, you know, and that's the beauty of a 1031 is, oh, I can sell this single family rental and purchase a condo or vacant land or another single family rental or a commercial, you know, as long as it satisfies, and we're talking to them, you know, does it satisfy this like kind requirement that's needed for a 1031?
Yeah.
But that's one of the big add values of a 1031 is that diversification, right?
Yep.
You know, and you see it, you know, yeah, I might want to move off the island because of flooding that might have occurred and move in town a little bit more. Still, can I still get that same rental value and still have that aspect of it? And the 1031 can help them with that.
Yeah.
You know, or it's building that portfolio. I've gotten this property that's cost, you know, it's very high on that, and who I'm going to rent to. Maybe I diversify that out into two other properties, and now I have a better return on my rental, you know, based on that aspect of it. So.
Yeah.
It's great from that end there. So so as a realtor, how do you feel like 1031s benefit you guys, in that regard? So you can obviously see some of the benefits. I know we kind of touched, from your end there. So how do you see that truly benefit?
Yeah, well, there's only about 9,000 realtors in Sarasota and Manatee County.
That's it?
That's it. So, there's not that much competition, No, I'm kidding. So there are actually that many. So standing out is imperative.
How knowing about 1031s, it differentiates you, right,
Absolutely.
from the competition. That's what you're always trying to show, how it is that you're going to make yourself different from that realtor right next to you that's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So awesome from that.
Yeah, arming ourselves with information and being able to share that with clients, again, so they don't have to be the expert in everything, and they can just know that they're in good hands and, choose someone that they trust and that'll carry through, for what's right and best for them.
No, that's great. And, kind of in there, so kind of just touching back, what would you say was the one most important thing a client who's looking to do a 1031 from a realtor standpoint they should know about?
I think they should, the critical dates are definitely, probably the biggest thing to know about 1031 from my point of view. So you just have to know that you're working on a timeline and be prepared to work within that timeline. So maybe a little bit easier in this market where the buyers have more control, but if you're trying to do a 1031 in the seller's market, you need to, be a little more aggressive when you're making your offers.
Right, and we have those, different ways we could structure 1031 depending if it's a buyer or seller's market, depending on who's trying to do it, from that end there in that regard. So, and that's right. We always say you want to start the process early. Understand what you're doing from our end. Talk to your CPA. Because your timeline doesn't start until you actually sell. So it doesn't mean you can't start ahead of time. So you should always be looking and engaging, with you to start that process and say, let's start looking for this, because we can always negotiate dates a certain way to help benefit in that regard there. So,
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, how long does something have to be rented to be considered eligible for a 1031?
So there's nothing in the guidelines that specifically say you have to hold a property for this long.
Okay.
Unless you are buying or selling from a related party, that's the only time something comes into play.
Okay.
From there. So what we say is, the IRS is always going to look at the facts and circumstances surrounding the situation of the property in that regard. Was it held for investment? Was it held for business use in that case to help solidify that it's part of a 1031 there?
Okay.
And so for us, it's always talking back, saying, hey, you might want to discuss with your CPA, is there that much of a short time frame? How long has it been reported on, how many tax return years has it been reported, and so forth along those lines there. And so those are kind of plays that come in the factor there to determine the overall picture. But specifically inside the code, there's nothing that sits there and says you have to hold a property for 1 year specifically before you can do another 1031 or be able to sell and be eligible for a 1031.
Okay, interesting. So it's
Very,
always
very
worth
good
having
question.
the conversation and seeing if it qualifies, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, always worth it, because again, it's the facts and circumstances surrounding it. And I could tell you stories left and right of certain things that come up, and really we want their CPA to sign off, because they're the ones reporting it for them and so forth. So it's really talking to them, their CPA, and making sure there's that comfort level depending on what happens, and can you justify it along those lines there. So great question. It's something that always great to see, have those questions come in, knowing that we're be able to help kind of answer that for you. So
yeah, I appreciate that.
No, appreciate the time, Alex, for coming out today, sharing a little bit about you, and your real estate journey that comes to as a realtor here in Sarasota. So thank you for coming out today.
Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up our conversation with Alex. We hope you enjoyed these type of videos. If so, please make sure to subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.